What if I told you that everything you believe about spiritual authority is backwards? What if the church you think represents divine truth is actually built upon the systematic suppression of one of the most profound spiritual teachings ever recorded? What if the disciple who received the deepest revelations from Christ himself was deliberately erased from history and replaced with a convenient narrative that serves institutional power rather than spiritual truth? Right now, as you read these words, a quiet revolution is uncovering evidence so shocking that it forces us to reconsider not just our understanding of early Christianity, but the very nature of spiritual authority itself. Hidden in fragments scattered across centuries of suppression lies the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, a text so threatening to establish power structures that it was systematically eliminated from human consciousness for nearly 2,000 years. The evidence suggests that the divine feminine principle, represented by Mary of Magdala, isn't merely a religious symbol or theological concept. Instead, it's emerging as something far more powerful and transformative than we ever imagined. The missing key to understanding consciousness, reality, and the nature of spiritual authority itself. This isn't fantasy or wishful thinking. It's the cutting edge of consciousness research, and it's revolutionizing our understanding of how spiritual power actually works. The implications are staggering. If these rediscovered teachings are correct, then you are not dependent on external priests, institutions, or authorities for spiritual truth. You are carrying the divine feminine principle within your own consciousness, receptive, creative, and transformative forces that can connect you directly to the source of all spiritual authority. You are not separate from the divine. You are the divine feminine principle itself, waiting to be recognized and awakened. Consider this. When researchers examine the surviving fragments of the Gospel of Mary, they discover something impossible according to everything we thought we knew about early Christian authority. The woman, presented as a prostitute and peripheral follower, is revealed as the primary recipient of Christ's highest teachings and the one who achieved the kingdom that his male disciples remained confused about. Before her revelations were suppressed, she existed as pure spiritual potential, the living embodiment of how masculine and feminine consciousness integrate to create authentic spiritual authority. Among the voices that dared to speak truth to power in early Christianity, none was more threatening to emerging orthodox structures than Mary of Magdala. Her gospel presents her not as a mere follower, but as the recipient of direct revelation from the risen Christ, a revelation that would fundamentally challenge the masculine-dominated hierarchy developing within the early church. Where the canonical Gospels present Peter as the primary apostle and authority figure, the Gospel of Mary reveals a different dynamic entirely. In this text, it is Mary who receives the deepest mysteries and highest teachings directly from the resurrected Master. When Peter challenges her authority to speak these revelations, the risen Christ himself confirms her unique role. Do I not speak of all things in the name of the Father? Mary, you have become blessed as the right path for every man. This wasn't merely about gender politics. It represented a fundamental threat to the institutionalization of spiritual authority. The Gospel of Mary presents spiritual wisdom as something that emerges from within consciousness itself, not through external appointment or ecclesiastical hierarchy. The feminine principle in this Gospel represents something far more profound than gender identity. It embodies the receptive, creative, and transformative aspects of consciousness that are essential for genuine spiritual awakening. Where masculine energy often seeks to control, categorize, and impose structure, feminine energy flows, receives, transforms, and creates through intimate relationship with the mysterious. This understanding was seen as dangerous by those seeking to establish rigid doctrinal structures. A spiritual tradition that values inner revelation, direct knowing, and the transformative power of receptivity directly challenges any system that requires external validation, clerical mediation, or intellectual assent to predetermined beliefs. To understand why the Gospel of Mary Magdalene was systematically suppressed, we must examine the fundamental tension between authentic spiritual power and institutional control. The early centuries of Christianity were marked by fierce theological battles, not merely about doctrine, but about who would control the narrative of spiritual authority. The Gospel of Mary presents a radical decentralization of spiritual power. In this tradition, the authority to interpret divine truth does not reside in external institutions, ecclesiastical hierarchy, or intellectual orthodoxy. Instead, it emerges from the individual's capacity for inner revelation, direct experience, and the integration of both masculine and feminine principles within consciousness itself. This represented a direct challenge to the emerging orthodox structures that depended on external authority figures, doctrinal conformity, and institutional intermediation. If individuals could access divine wisdom directly through inner exploration and mystical union, what need was there for specialized clergy, formal sacraments, or doctrinal hierarchy? The suppression of the Gospel of Mary wasn't simply about her gender, though that was certainly a factor. It was about the threat her teachings posed to the entire project of institutionalizing spiritual authority. Among the most revolutionary aspects of the Gospel of Mary lies in its presentation of Mary as one who had achieved what Jesus called the kingdom. While his male disciples remained confused and argued among themselves about earthly power and authority, Mary alone had received and integrated the deepest teachings about the nature of consciousness and reality itself. The Gospel reveals that Mary had entered a state of consciousness where the individual and the universal became unified, not through intellectual understanding, but through direct experience of what Jesus describes as the kingdom within. This represents a fundamental shift from seeking external solutions to recognizing the infinite creative power residing within one's own consciousness. Consider the profound implications. The kingdom that Jesus promised is not somewhere in the afterlife or in some distant future realm. According to the Gospel of Mary, it exists as an actual state of consciousness that can be realized here and now through the integration of inner masculine and feminine principles. This isn't metaphor or symbolic language. It's a precise description of altered states of consciousness where the illusion of separation dissolves and the individual recognizes themselves as an expression of the universal creative principle. The masculine aspect represents active awareness, discrimination, and the capacity to observe. The feminine aspect represents receptivity, creativity, and the capacity to receive and transform consciousness itself. When these two aspects are integrated within the individual's consciousness, the result is what the ancients called the marriage of heaven and earth, a state where inner and outer, individual and universal, masculine and feminine become unified in conscious experience. Here's the revolutionary insight. Manifestation and transformation aren't about trying to change external circumstances through force or manipulation. They occur naturally when consciousness recognizes its own creative power and integrates both receptive and active aspects of awareness. Most people operate primarily from masculine consciousness, seeking to control, analyze, and impose their will upon reality. Others operate primarily from feminine consciousness, receiving, flowing, and transforming, but lacking the discriminatory power to direct their experience consciously. The Gospel of Mary teaches that true spiritual authority emerges only when these two aspects are consciously integrated within the individual's own awareness. This integration represents the kingdom that Jesus speaks of, a state where the individual recognizes themselves as a conscious co-creator of reality, capable of receiving divine revelation and channeling it into conscious expression without the distortions of ego or the limitations of external authority. The implications for personal transformation are staggering. When you understand yourself as a unified field of both receptive and creative consciousness, you no longer need to struggle against reality or seek validation from external sources. Instead, you become the conscious artist of your own experience, capable of receiving divine inspiration and manifesting it through the marriage of inner wisdom and outer expression. Hidden within the Gospel of Mary lies perhaps the most revolutionary teaching of all: the recognition that the Divine Father is not an external being to be worshipped, petitioned, or obeyed, but the creative principle of consciousness itself, residing within each individual as their own true nature. When Jesus reveals the ultimate nature of reality to Mary, he describes a hierarchy of spiritual beings and cosmic structures. But the deeper teaching is more radical. These cosmic hierarchies are not external realities to be reached or achieved, but aspects of consciousness itself, waiting to be integrated within the individual's own awareness. Consider the profound implications. The Father that Jesus speaks of is not out there somewhere in a distant realm of perfect being. It is the creative consciousness within your own awareness, the infinite field of potential that creates and sustains all experience through the marriage of receptive and active awareness. This understanding dissolves the fundamental illusion of separation between individual and divine consciousness. When Mary receives these revelations, she doesn't encounter an external deity or cosmic hierarchy to be worshipped or appeased. Instead, she recognizes the divine principle within herself and realizes her identity as a conscious expression of the universal creative force. The Gospel of Mary suggests that the Father represents the masculine aspect of consciousness, the capacity for observation, discrimination, and creative expression. But this masculine aspect can only function authentically when integrated with its feminine counterpart, the receptive, transformative, and creative aspects that allow consciousness to receive and channel divine inspiration. This is why Mary alone could receive these teachings, while the male disciples remained confused and argued among themselves. She had achieved the integration of masculine and feminine principles within her own consciousness, creating what the ancients called the marriage of heaven and earth, a state where individual and universal consciousness become unified in conscious experience. The great deception that the Gospel of Mary reveals is the belief that we are separate from the divine, that we need external authority to connect with God, or that spiritual authority resides outside ourselves. But when we recognize the Father within as the creative consciousness that creates and sustains all experience, we discover that we have never been separate from the divine source. This recognition transforms the entire project of spiritual seeking. Instead of seeking external salvation, divine approval, or spiritual authority from external sources, we begin to recognize ourselves as the very consciousness we have been seeking. Instead of trying to reach God or achieve enlightenment, we begin to express the divine principle that we already are. The Gospel of Mary invites us to recognize that the kingdom of heaven exists not in some distant future or external realm, but as an actual state of consciousness available to anyone who can integrate masculine and feminine principles within their own awareness. This integration represents the ultimate spiritual authority, not based on external appointment or intellectual qualification, but on the direct recognition of our identity as conscious expressions of the universal creative principle. The feminine wisdom that Mary represents is not about gender or sexual identity, but about the receptive, creative, and transformative aspects of consciousness that are essential for spiritual awakening. When integrated with masculine discrimination and creative expression, this feminine principle becomes the gateway to recognizing the Father within, the divine consciousness that creates and sustains all reality. This is why her teachings were so threatening to emerging orthodox structures. They offered a path to spiritual authority and divine recognition that bypassed external hierarchy entirely, suggesting that each individual possessed inherent access to the divine through the conscious integration of inner masculine and feminine principles. Yet, despite systematic efforts to eliminate these teachings, they persisted through underground networks of practitioners who understood their revolutionary implications. The Gospel of Mary was preserved not in official church archives, but in hidden collections maintained by those who recognized its profound challenge to external authority. The survival of this text, until its rediscovery, demonstrates the power of authentic spiritual wisdom to transcend attempts at suppression. The knowledge was never truly lost. It was simply waiting for an era when humanity would be ready to integrate these teachings about inner authority and the divine feminine. Today, as we stand at the threshold of a new understanding of consciousness and spiritual authority, the Gospel of Mary offers us the key to unlocking the suppressed wisdom that could transform how we understand ourselves and our relationship to the divine source of all existence.